Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we will talk about king and pawn endgames, and we will see how to use the principle of the opposition to its fullest extent. In the first part of the video we will see positions when we are in the weaker side and trying to hold a draw. And then in the second part we will learn how to properly convert a winning advantage using a notch flanking technique. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Here it's black to move, which means that white has the opposition. But luckily for us, the opposition here is not decisive. But we need to be careful where to put our king. If we are careless and we go king to a7, white will go a5, forcing an exchange of pawns and taking the opposition, and now we are just lost. So here the correct way to draw is to go king to c7. No, a5 doesn't work, because after an exchange, this is just a draw. And also c5 doesn't help, because yes, now white has the opposition, but in the same time it's a corner pawn, so there is no win. So after king to c7, the only thing left for white to do is to execute an outflanking maneuver, king to a6. Now we simply take the opposition with king to c6, and this is just a draw. King to a7, king to c7, king to a8, king to c8, and there is no way to make any progress. There is a couple of things that we should note here. Black here is able to maintain the draw because he has the opposition, which means if we have the same position on the board with black to move, black is just lost. Now if we take this a4 pawn and we put it back on a3, white is just winning. And the reason here is that white have a reserve tempi. And let's see what we mean by that. Now after king to c7, king to a6, king to c6, now we can simply go a4 and we give black the move, and now we are winning. After king to c7, king to a7, king to c6, and now it's time to outflank the black king and we simply win the position. King to b8, king to c5, king to b7, and now we win the pawn, and the a pawn will just queen and we will win. Another important detail that we should note, if we move the position one file to the right, it immediately becomes winning. And the reason here, if king to b7 we go b5, and if king to d7 we go d5. And because we have no corner pawns, the position is winning. For example here, king to d7, d5, pawn take, king take, and we have the opposition, and now we are winning because it's a b pawn this time and it's not an a pawn. Let's now move to another interesting position where we will use the knowledge that we have just learned in the first position. Here it's black to move and we are trying to make a draw. So let's see what are our options. We can go king to a5 or we can push our pawn. Let's start with the first one, king to a5. Now king to b3, if king to a6, king to b4, and now we take on b5, and after king to b7 we go c4. And now we see it's the same position that we studied in the first example with a reserve tempi a2 to a4, which means that we are winning. After king to c7, king to a6, king to c6, and now a4, and we win. So instead here, if black goes b4, we simply go c4, and after a6 we take on b4, king to b7, king to b5, and it's the same position again. So king to a5 here is bad for black, so the only move that is left is to go b4. After b4, white obviously cannot take the pawn because after the king takes, it's just a simple draw. So white will go c4. Now we go b3. And the idea of this move b3 is that we want to provoke white's pawn to a3. And we will see why this is important. Here, of course, if white takes, now after king to b4, king to c2 and b5, this is just a simple draw. So here white has to go a3. Now a5, king take on b3, a6 and b4. Now king to b7 obviously loses to king to b5 because white will have a reserve tempi. So the way to draw here is to go king to a7. Now after king to b5, king to b7. And the key difference here is that now black has the opposition and this reserve tempi doesn't help anymore. For example, after king to b4, king to c6, king to b3, king to c5. If white tries to go a4 to try to pass the move to black, we simply go king to c6, and after king to b4, king to b7, king to b5, and this is just a simple draw. King to c7, king to a6, and king to c6 with an easy draw. Let's move on now to our next example. Here it's white to move, and obviously white is trying to make a draw. And here we have a couple of options. The most obvious one is to simply take the opposition here on f1. And we can also go king to g3 trying to attack this pawn. So let's start with this one. If we go king to g3, this is simply loses because we give black the opposition now after king to e1. Now if we continue with our plan to attack the pawn and we go king to g4, king to f2, king take on g5, and after black takes on f3, this pawn will just make a queen, and black is winning. So after king to f2, king to e2, king to g3, and now black executes an outflanking maneuver, king to f1, king to h3, and king to f2, king to g4, king to g2, king take on g5, king take on f3, and now this pawn will just make a new queen, and we are lost. So now king to g3 doesn't work, which means that we have to keep the opposition if we want to draw this game. So let's try if we try to keep the close opposition and we go king to f1. Unfortunately, this also loses because after king to d2, king to f2, king to d3, because if we want to keep the opposition, we have to put our king on f3. And sadly, the f3 square is occupied by our pawn. So here we lose the opposition and we simply lose also the game. Black will use the same technique as the first variation and we are lost. So here we cannot give the opposition to black and also we cannot take the close opposition immediately on f1. So how can we draw this game? The idea here is to take the distant opposition. And that's why here we go king to h1. And the idea here is that after king to d2, king to h2, still maintaining the opposition with 3 squares between the kings. If black here tries to do the same thing and goes king to d3, now we have access to the h3 square. And we are still maintaining the opposition and it's just a draw. For example here king to e2, king to g2, king to e3, king to g3, if king to d2, and now if we are careless again and we go king to f2, we are lost because of king to d3 and the f3 square is occupied. So here instead we go king to h2, still maintaining the distant opposition, and it's just a draw. This example over here is very interesting. We can immediately see that pawns are lost. If we try to defend them when we go king to g2, king to g4, king to h2, and now the pawns are just lost, and we also lose the game. So here, since the white pawns are lost anyway, here comes a very interesting idea, which is to sacrifice these pawns and to achieve something else. Here we can see that the black pawn is on f2, which means if we take these two pawns from the board, and if the black king occupies one of these three squares, then the resulting pawn endgame will be winning for black. But on the other hand, if this pawn, for example, was on f5, then black has to control one of these three squares in order to win the game. And we can see that our king is also close to these squares. So here comes a very interesting idea, which is to sacrifice these two pawns, and that's why we go here g6. And if black tries to take with his king, it's just a draw. We go king to g2, king to f5, king to f3, and we defend our pawn, and it's a draw. So here black has to take with the pawn, and now we go f5. Pawn capture on f5, and now if we want to draw this game, we have to defend these three key squares. Here we can see that black has the opposition, but unfortunately he can't keep it. We go king to g1, king to g5, maintaining the opposition, and now king to f1. And because the f-pawn is on f5, black cannot keep the opposition. If king to g4, king to g2, taking the opposition and drawing the game. If king to f4, simply king to f2. And if black goes king to h5, king to f2, king to h4, king to f3, king to g5, and we simply take the opposition and it's just a draw. Now we will move to our next part of the video where we will learn how to convert a winning advantage in a king and pawn endgame. Here the winning plan is to get close opposition and then outflank your opponent. For example, if we manage to achieve a position where the white king is on f5 and the black king is on f7, and it's black to move and black has to go to e7, then we go to g6 and we start to push the black king away and then we win this pawn and eventually we win the position. But how can we do that? A very natural move is to check the opposition on the e file, but this is an immediate draw. And the reason here why is because the opposition on the e file is meaningless, because we simply can't convert it into the close opposition. For example, here after king to e8, king to e2, king to e7, king to e3, king back to e8, king to e4, king to e7, and here we can see clearly the problem. The e5 square is controlled by the black pawn and there is no progress to be made on the e file. And here it's a draw because we can't go back to the f file. If we move, for example, to the f file, black will take the opposition, and here the opposition on the f file is decisive. If black has the opposition on the f file, it's a draw, and if we manage to get the opposition on the f file, it's a win. And that's why the winning move here is king to g2, because we simply here can't stay on the f file. If we stay on the f file and we go king to f2, black will go king to f8, taking the opposition, and this is a draw. So here instead we go king to g2. And in order to understand this move better, let's imagine if the black king was on f7. And now it's black to move and he goes king to e7. What are you gonna do? The winning move obviously is to outflank the black king. And that's why here we go king to g2. Now after king to f8, we must check the opposition, so we go king to f2, king to e7, and now we must outflank the black king, king to g3, king to f7, and now king to f3, king to e7, king to g4, king to f8, and now we take the opposition with king to f4, king to e7, we outflank again, king to g5, king to f7, and now we manage to transform the distant opposition into the close one. And now it's very easy. After king to e7, king to g6, king to e8, king to f6, king to d7, king to f7, king to d8, king to e6, attacking the pawn. And now king to c7 and king to e7, and the black must go away. And now we take the pawn and we are winning. In this next example, it's white to move, which means that black has the opposition. So if we want to win, we must find a way to take the opposition from black. Here, if we simply attack the pawn, black will go king to b6, and there is no progress to be made because black has the opposition. King to e7, king to a7, king to d7, king to b7, and we are not achieving any progress. And here, if we go king to e5, trying to repeat the position, if black goes king to a5, he will give us another chance, but simply here black will go king to a7, and now it's just a simple draw. King to d6, king to b6, king to c6, king to a6, and there is no progress. So the winning move here must take the opposition away from black. And that's why we go king to f5. And the reason here is actually very simple. If black wants to take the opposition, he has to put his king on b5, and the b5 square is controlled by our pawn. So we immediately win the opposition. If black goes king to a6, we simply go king to e6. If black goes to b6, we simply go to f6, taking the opposition and winning. King to a7, king to e7, king to b7, king to d7, king to b6, and now it's a simple outflanking maneuver, king to c8, king to a7, and king to c7, and we win the black pawns, and then we win the game. Our last example here is very instructive, and you should try to understand it deeply. Here, if we try to go g3, after black takes, we take and we have the opposition, but this isn't enough, because simply here, if we try to go for the black pawn, black will allow us to take the pawn, but simply black will stay here on c7, c8, and b8, and whenever we take the pawn, black will reply with king to b7, and this is a draw, because black will have then the opposition. For example, here, if we take on b5, king to b7, and this is a draw. So here the winning move is to go king to e4. Now black must keep defending his pawn, and he goes king to g4. And now king to d5. Now if black tries to attack our pawn, king to g3, we simply go king to e5, and if black takes, we take the black pawn, and this is winning. And this is actually the idea to win this position. We have to achieve a favorable exchange of pawns on the king side, and then go to win the black pawn on the queen side, and eventually win the position. Here black will go king to h5, because if black tries to take the direct opposition, after king to d4, black cannot keep the opposition on f4, because the black pawn occupies the f4 square. Now after king to f6, king to e4, king to g5, king to e5, king to g4, and king to f6, we successfully managed to outflank the black king. Now after king to g3, king to a5, we take the black pawn and we are winning. So here black must go king to h5, keeping the distant opposition. And now the winning move is to go king to c6. And this is actually very clever. We are creating a double threat. We are threatening to win the black pawn, and at the same time, we are threatening to gain the opposition. If black wants to maintain the opposition, he has to go king to g6, but then we will win the black pawn. For example, here king to g6, we take on b5, and if black tries to take our pawn, king to g5, king to c5, king to g4, king to d5, king to g3, king to e4, and now we simply win. So here black goes king to g5. And now we simply gain back the opposition. And after king to h4, now we execute an outflanking maneuver, king to d6, king to g4, king to e6, king to g5, and now we manage to transform the distant opposition into the close one. And now when black moves, we will execute our outflanking maneuver, king to g4 and king to f6, king to g3, king to f5, king capture on g2, and we take the pawn on f4, and we are winning. Now before we end our video, I will give you an exercise to think about. Here we want to mate the black king, but we want to achieve this using only one move from the white rook, which means that you can move the white rook only one time, and this move has to create a checkmate. So you can only use your king, and then you should try to check the close opposition, and after that you give checkmate with the white rook. Okay guys, don't hesitate to put your analysis on the comment section and we will try to discuss this position together. Now if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please hit the subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell to get our latest updates. Thank you guys for watching and see you in the next video.